The rain was falling sideways, not drizzling, not sprinkling, falling sideways, like the sky itself had tilted on its axis and decided to drown everything beneath it. And there she stood, 8 months pregnant, barefoot on cold stone steps, her thin dress plastered to her swollen body like a second skin, water streaming down her face, mixing with tears she couldn't stop and didn't bother trying to. Behind her, the massive oak doors of the Ashford cliffside estate slammed shut with a sound that split the night in half. The deadbolt engaged, a sharp metallic click that echoed inside her chest like the closing of a coffin lid. Inside that house, her billionaire husband stood with his fists clenched at his sides and his mother's hand resting on his shoulder like a crown. His last words still hung in the air between them, still vibrating against the walls of the foyer like something alive and poisonous. "Get out of my house. You are nothing but a liar and a fraud." Now let me ask you something, and I need you to really sit with this question before we go any further. Imagine carrying a life inside you, 8 months of growing this miracle beneath your heart, talking to your baby when no one's around, singing to her in the shower, pressing your hands to your belly every time she kicks because it feels like the most beautiful conversation you've ever had. Now imagine the person you trusted most in this entire world, the man who put a ring on your finger and swore before God that he would protect you, looks you dead in the eye and calls you a liar, not because of anything you did, not because of anything he saw with his own eyes, but because of a lie someone else told. Would you survive what happens next? This is the story of a woman named Maren Calloway, a woman who was betrayed by the one person who swore to protect her, thrown into a hurricane while 8 months pregnant, left for dead, on a cliff road in the middle of the night, abandoned by the man who once said she was the only honest person in his world. But here's what Dominic Ashford didn't know when he locked that door. The woman he threw away, she wasn't going to break. She was going to burn. And from those ashes, she was going to rise so high that he would spend the rest of his miserable life staring up at what he lost. And exactly 3 hours after that door slammed shut, his phone rang. And when the voice on the other end finished speaking, every drop of blood drained from Dominic Ashford's face. Because in that moment, he realized what he had truly done. But by then, it was already too late. Welcome back, my beautiful family. This is Love Chronicles with Mr. Incredicle. The place where stories heal, stories challenge, stories shake you to your core, and then rebuild you stronger than you were before. Before we step into this journey today, I want to take a moment. I want to bow my heart before the Almighty and lift up a prayer, specifically for every woman listening right now. Heavenly Father, I come before you with reverence and love. Today I ask that you place your mighty hand over every woman in this family. Protect her spirit, guard her dignity, strengthen the parts of her that no one sees, the parts that carry the weight of homes, the silence of pain, the patience of love that goes unnoticed. She rises every day with grace even when the world gives her nothing but resistance. She loves without conditions even when love is not returned. She sacrifices without counting the cost, cries without showing the tears, and stands tall even when her legs are trembling. Lord, reward her. Let her prayers be answered before they leave her lips. Let her never feel invisible, never feel weak, never feel alone. Surround her with people who see her, honor her, and love her the way she deserves. And if she is in her storm right now, if she is standing in the rain wondering if anyone cares, let this story be the voice that whispers, you are not forgotten. Your storm is not your ending. Amen. My beautiful family, today's story will test your heart. It will make you angry. It will make you cry. It will make you want to reach through the screen and shake someone. But I promise you, by the end, it will also make you believe that no storm lasts forever, that broken things can become the most beautiful things in the world. Stay with me. Feel every word. And let this space remain what it has always been, a place of honor, healing, and truth. Now, before we begin, I need something from you. If you believe, deep in your spirit, that the truth always rises no matter how deep someone tries to bury it, hit that like button right now. Don't wait. Do it now. If you have ever been misjudged by someone you loved, if you've ever been called something you are not by someone who should have known better, type the words "I survived" in the comments. Let me see you. Let this family see you. And if this is your first time here, welcome. Subscribe and join us. Because stories like this one are exactly why this channel exists. Now, let's begin. And I warn you, once this story takes hold of your heart, it will not let go. The candle on the nursery windowsill flickered against the darkening sky as Marin Calloway Ashford pressed her palm to the curve of her belly and felt the tiny drumbeat of life within her. 8 months now. 8 months of growing this miracle inside a body that ached and swelled and transformed in ways she hadn't known were possible. But she didn't mind. Not one bit. Every ache was a reminder. Every kick was a conversation. Every flutter beneath her ribs felt like the most sacred secret two people could share, even though one of them hadn't been born yet. She stood in the nursery of the Ashford estate, a sprawling cliffside manor that overlooked the Atlantic Ocean from 500 feet above the water. The room was exquisite. Pale blue walls she had painted herself, spending 3 days on a step stool despite Dominic begging her to hire someone. A mahogany crib, imported from Italy, hand-carved with ivy patterns along the railings. A mobile of silver stars that caught the ocean light through the tall windows and scattered it across the ceiling like a private constellation. On the shelf, stuffed animals arranged in a perfect row. In the closet, tiny dresses and onesies organized by color, by size, by the age she'd be when she wore them. Everything planned, everything prepared, everything perfect. "Your daddy is going to be so proud of you," Marin whispered to her belly, smoothing her hand over the fabric of a miniature cotton dress. "We're going to be so happy, baby girl, the 3 of us. We're going to be everything." The baby kicked hard against her ribs, once, twice, like she was agreeing, like she already knew. Marin smiled. In that moment, standing in the golden light of a nursery she had built with her own hands, surrounded by the proof of a future she believed in with her whole heart, she felt something close to perfect peace. She didn't know it was the last time she would ever feel that way in this house. See, to understand what happened next, you need to understand how Marin ended up here in the first place. Because the story of Marin and Dominic Ashford didn't begin in a mansion. It began in a ballroom, and even then the cracks were already forming. Marin Calloway came from nothing, and I don't mean modest beginnings or a humble background. I mean nothing. A single mother who died of cancer when Marin was 23. No father in the picture. Never had been. No siblings, no family money, no safety net. She'd put herself through community college working double shifts at a restaurant, then worked her way up to event catering for a company that serviced high-end corporate functions. That's how she met him. Dominic Ashford, heir to the Ashford Development Group, a real estate empire worth north of $3 billion. He was 33 years old, sharp-jawed, dark-eyed, with the kind of quiet confidence that filled every room he entered without him ever raising his voice. Women threw themselves at him, heiresses, socialites, models, daughters of senators, and he smiled politely at all of them and went home alone. But the night of the Ashford Foundation's annual charity gala, he noticed a woman carrying a tray of champagne glasses who wasn't trying to be noticed at all. Marin. She was moving through the crowd with quiet efficiency, refilling glasses, clearing plates, invisible to everyone in the room the way service workers always are to people with money. But Dominic watched her all night. Watched the way she smiled at the kitchen staff when no one else bothered. Watched the way she steadied a nervous young waiter who nearly dropped an entire tray. Watched the way she moved through a room full of performative people and was the only one who seemed genuinely real. He asked for her number. She laughed and said no. He asked again the next week when she catered another event. She said no again. The third time, he showed up at the restaurant where she worked on weeknights, sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and said, "I'm not leaving until you agree to one dinner, just one." She agreed. One dinner became 2, then 10, then every night they could manage. He told her she was the only honest person he'd ever met. She told him he was the first person who ever made her feel seen. Their love was electric, unlikely, defiant, the billionaire and the waitress, straight out of a story no one would believe. He proposed on a rain-soaked beach 11 months later, both of them drenched and laughing, and she said yes before he finished the question. But there was a shadow at the edge of every beautiful moment, a presence that watched their love story with cold, calculating eyes and saw not romance, but threat. Vivian Ashford, Dominic's mother, the widow who had run the Ashford empire with an iron grip since her husband's death 15 years earlier. Platinum hair, winter white wardrobe, a smile that never reached her eyes, and a voice like silk draped over a blade. Vivian had opposed the relationship from the first moment she heard about it. Called Marin a project, called her a phase, called her a charity case in a cocktail dress who knows exactly what she's doing. She told Dominic that women like Marin, women with no family, no money, no connections, always had ulterior motives. Always. Dominic defended Marin, or so Marin believed. He told her he'd handled his mother, that Vivian would come around, that love would win. But Marin noticed things. The way Vivian rearranged the seating chart at the wedding to isolate Marin from everyone she knew. The way Vivian controlled the guest list, cutting every friend Marin tried to invite. The whispered conversations between mother and son after every argument, conversations that stopped the moment Marin entered the room. Marin noticed, but she chose peace, chose love, chose to believe that her husband's loyalty was stronger than his mother's poison. She didn't realize she was building her life on a foundation that had been cracked from the very beginning. She didn't know that every time Dominic said, "I'll handle my mother," what he really meant was, "I'll avoid the confrontation for one more day." And she didn't know, couldn't have known, that Vivian Ashford had been planning her destruction from the moment Dominic put that ring on her finger. Marin believed love was a shield. She didn't know it could also be a blindfold. The front doors of the estate exploded open with a violence that sent the nursery candles sideways and turned Marin's blood to ice. That sound, the crash of heavy oak against stone, was wrong. Fundamentally, viscerally wrong. In 3 years of marriage, Dominic had never entered their home like that. He always called out for her, always came upstairs gently, always kissed her belly before he kissed her lips. Always. Dominic? Marin moved toward the stairs, one hand gripping the railing, the other cradling her heavy stomach. Each step down felt heavier than the last, like her body knew something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. "Honey, is everything okay?" No answer, just footsteps. Fast, aggressive, taking the stairs in furious bounds. And then he appeared at the top of the landing, and Marin's heart stopped beating. His face was twisted into something she had never seen, not in their worst arguments, not in his darkest moods, not in any version of this man she thought she knew. His collar was torn open. His jaw was locked so tight the veins in his neck stood out like rope. His eyes, those dark, beautiful eyes that had once looked at her like she was the only woman in the world, were wild, red-rimmed, burning with something she could only describe as hatred. And behind him, ascending the stairs with the precision of a blade, came Vivienne, winter white from head to toe, platinum hair swept back in a chignon so tight it seemed to pull the years from her face. She carried a leather portfolio pressed against her chest like a breastplate, like evidence at a tribunal, and her expression was calm, composed, and utterly victorious, like a general surveying a conquered battlefield. What happened? Marin reached for Dominic, confusion and terror flooding through her. Did something happen at work? Please talk to me. He jerked away from her touch like her fingers carried acid. Don't you dare touch me with those lying hands. What are you talking about? Dominic, you're scaring me, please. Vivian stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor like a metronome counting down to an explosion. Show her, Dominic. Show her the proof of what she's done to this family. Proof of what? Marin looked between them, her mind racing through every possibility and coming up empty. Someone please tell me what is happening. Dominic slammed the leather portfolio onto the dining table with such force that the crystal chandelier above rattled and swayed. The binding burst open. Photographs spilled across the dark wood, glossy, high resolution, unmistakable. They showed Marin, her face, her body, in the arms of a man she had never seen before. Intimate, explicit, taken in what appeared to be a hotel room she had never entered, with a man she had never touched. The room tilted. The walls closed in. Marin grabbed the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. What is this? Dominic, this isn't real. These are fake. Someone made these. The metadata is clean. Vivian's voice was silk over steel. Sweet, precise, and poisonous. My investigator confirmed it. No digital manipulation. These photographs were taken at the Regency Grand Hotel, room 714, on the evening of October 19th, 3 months before your wedding. October 19th. Marin's mind scrambled desperately. October 19th. She had been at her mother's hospice that night. She had held her dying mother's hand until 2 in the morning. She had wept alone in a hospital corridor while the nurses changed the sheets. I was at the hospice that night. The words ripped out of her throat. Dominic, I was with my mother. She was dying. You drove me there yourself. Don't you remember? But Vivian wasn't finished. She never was. My investigator also confirmed that the projected date of conception falls outside the window of your marriage. She delivered this with surgical precision. each word a scalpel stroke calculated to cut in exactly the right place. The baby isn't yours, Dominic. This woman used you. She was already pregnant when she walked down that aisle. That is a lie. Marin screamed, and the sound tore through the manor like shattering glass. She grabbed the table, her body shaking so violently she could barely stand. The baby is yours, ours. I have never been with another man, not before you, not during our marriage, not ever. She turned to Dominic, begging with every part of her being, her eyes, her voice, her trembling, outstretched hands. You know me. You chose me. You stood in front of me and said I was the only honest person in your world. Was that a lie? Did you never believe in me at all? Please, look at me. Look into my eyes and tell me you don't see the truth. And for one suspended, agonizing second, something shifted behind Dominic's eyes. A fracture, a fissure, a crack in the wall his mother had spent 35 years building around his mind. For one heartbeat, Marin saw it. The man who had proposed on a rain-soaked beach, the man who had cried the first time he felt the baby kick, the man who had whispered promises against her skin in the dark. That man was still in there, trapped, screaming behind glass, because deep down, in the part of himself he was most afraid of, Dominic knew. He knew Marin was telling the truth. He could see it in her face, could feel it in his gut, could hear it in the desperation of her voice. Some primal, instinctive part of him recognized that his wife was innocent and his mother was lying. But believing Marin meant confronting Vivienne. It meant standing in front of the woman who had controlled every aspect of his life since childhood, who had chosen his schools, his friends, his career, who had driven away every girlfriend she didn't approve of, and saying, "You're a liar." It meant becoming the bad son, the ungrateful son, the son who chose a waitress over his own mother. And Dominic Ashford had spent 35 years avoiding that confrontation. 35 years of compliance disguised as loyalty. 35 years of cowardice dressed up as family values. So he pushed the doubt down, buried it, chose the easier path, chose the lie, because the lie let him stay comfortable, stay safe, stay the obedient son his mother had engineered him to be. I thought I knew you. His voice broke on the words, raw pain mixing with manufactured rage. I thought you were different from every woman my mother warned me about. But she was right. She said you were after my money. She said girls from your background always have ulterior motives. And I defended you. I damaged my relationship with my own mother because I believed in you, because I thought you actually loved me. I do love you. Marin was sobbing now, hot, desperate tears blurring her vision. Dominic, please. Vivienne placed her hand on her son's shoulder. Her face was arranged in a mask of theatrical sympathy. The concerned mother, the reluctant truth-teller, the woman who didn't want to be right. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, darling. I truly am. But better now than after the child is born, and you're legally responsible for another man's mistake. Don't you dare call my baby that. Marin stepped forward, protective fury overriding her fear. Her hands instinctively cradled her belly. The baby was kicking frantically, sensing her mother's distress, reacting to the cortisol and adrenaline flooding Marin's bloodstream. Dominic, listen to me. I don't know what those photographs show, but they are wrong. They've been altered, fabricated, manipulated. Someone created them. This is your baby, our baby. Please, let me take a test. Any lab, right now, tonight. I will prove it. The cruelest betrayals don't come from enemies' family. They come from the people who once held your heart and decided to crush it. Because Dominic Ashford looked at his wife's tear-stained face, looked at her swollen belly carrying what was undeniably his child, looked at the woman who had loved him without conditions for 3 years, and he made his choice. Get out. 2 words. Quiet. Cold. Final. Every trace of warmth burned away to frozen ash. Marin's breath caught in her chest like a fist had closed around her lungs. What? Get out of my house. His voice was ice, flat, mechanical, devoid of everything she'd ever loved about it. You are a liar, a manipulator, a fraud. I don't want to see you or that child ever again. Dominic, please. Marin reached for him desperately, her hands shaking. It's a hurricane warning outside. I'm 8 months pregnant. Please, just let me stay until morning, just until the storm passes. Then we can talk. We can go to a different lab. We can figure this out. There's nothing to figure out. He walked to the front door and opened it. The storm exploded into the foyer like a living thing. Rain driving sideways through the opening, wind tearing at the curtains, the howl of it drowning out everything except the thunder that cracked across the sky like God himself was splitting the world in two. Lightning turned the darkness white for one terrible second. Through the open doorway, Marin could see the cliff road already flooding, water rushing across the stone in dark, churning ribbons. She could see the trees bending sideways. She could see the ocean far below, violent and frothing, smashing against the rocks with apocalyptic fury. Dominic, I'm begging you, not for me, for the baby. Please, you should have thought about that before you betrayed this family. Vivian's voice came from behind, calm, measured, satisfied. Dominic did not speak, did not look at her. He stood beside the open door with his jaw clenched and his eyes fixed on the floor, because looking at her face would have required him to see what he already knew, that she was telling the truth, that his mother was lying, that he was committing the most unforgivable act of his life. But cowardice had won, as it always had, as it always would. Marin walked through the door. The rain hit her like a wall of ice. She gasped, staggering forward, her thin dress instantly plastered to her swollen body. Wind tore at her hair, blinded her, stole the breath from her lungs. She stumbled down the stone steps, her bare feet slipping on the wet surface, her hands reaching back. The door slammed shut behind her. The deadbolt engaged. That sound, that sharp, metallic click, it echoed inside her chest like the last heartbeat of a life that was already over. Through the window beside the door, she could see them. Dominic standing in the hallway, his hands at his sides. Vivian beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Both of them watching her through the glass like she was a stranger. A criminal, something to be disposed of. Then Vivian reached over and pulled the curtain closed, cutting off even that last connection. Severing the final thread, Marin stood in the rain, shaking from cold and shock and a disbelief so total it felt like her mind had simply stopped working. One hand supporting her belly, the baby thrashing inside her, panicked, distressed, kicking against the walls of her womb like she was trying to escape what was happening. "It's okay, baby," Marin choked out. Water filled her mouth. Thunder swallowed her words. "We're okay. We're going to be okay." She had no phone, no wallet, no keys, no shoes. Everything was inside the house, inside the home that was no longer hers. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles down a cliff road that was already flooding. She started walking. The contractions began before she reached the end of the driveway. Sharp, violent, wrong, too early, too strong, her body rebelling against what was happening to her mind. She doubled over on the flooded road, both hands gripping her stomach as pain ripped through her abdomen with a force that made her cry out. No, no, not now, please not now. Lightning split the sky. Thunder answered like the earth was breaking apart. Rain pounded her body like fists from heaven. She took 3 more steps. 5, 10, each one harder than the last, each one requiring more strength than she thought she had left. Another contraction, this one so powerful it drove her to her knees in water that was rushing past her calves now, cold enough to steal sensation from her legs. Help! She tried to scream, but the storm swallowed her voice like it had never existed. Somebody help me, please, my baby. No one heard. No one came. Lightning flashed again, turning the world white for one terrible frozen second. In that flash, she saw her own shadow on the stone wall, small, broken, alone on a cliff road in the middle of a hurricane. And then her legs gave out. Marin collapsed face forward into the flood. The water rushed over her, cold and black and indifferent. The last thing she felt before the darkness took her was her baby kicking weakly inside her, fighting for a life that was slipping away with every second. 3 blocks from the house where her husband had thrown her out to die. 3 blocks from the man who chose his mother's lies over his wife's truth. 3 blocks from everything she thought her life would be. And inside the Ashford estate, Dominic sat on the couch, the fabricated photographs scattered around him like fallen leaves. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Vivian brought him tea in his favorite mug, set it on the table with a smile she didn't bother hiding anymore. "You did the right thing, darling." His phone rang. He stared at it. Let it ring. It stopped. Rang again. Stopped. Rang a 3rd time. On the 4th call, something cold and heavy settling in his stomach like a stone, he answered. "What?" The voice on the other end was professional, controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of urgency that made every hair on Dominic's body stand up. "Mr. Ashford, this is Officer Delgado with the Coastal Police Department. We need you to come to Atlantic General Hospital immediately. Dominic's grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles turned white. Why? What happened? Sir, your wife was found unconscious on the cliff road during the storm. She's in critical condition. Emergency surgery is underway. The baby may not survive. How quickly can you get here? The phone slipped from Dominic's hand. It clattered to the floor and the screen cracked against the stone tile. He looked down at the scattered photographs. He looked at his mother's face, and for the first time, the satisfaction there wasn't reassuring. It was terrifying. He looked at the locked front door, the door he had pushed his 8 months pregnant wife through into a Category 2 hurricane. His face drained of all color, all blood, all life. Oh God, he whispered. His voice cracked in half. What have I done? I need to stop here for a moment, family. If this story is already gripping your heart, if you can feel what Marin is feeling right now, collapsed on that road, alone in that storm, betrayed by the man who was supposed to protect her, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button. Not for me, for every woman who has ever been wronged by someone who swore to love her, for every woman who has been called a liar when she was telling the truth. Share this video. Send it to someone who is going through their own storm right now. Someone who needs to know that the rain stops, that the sun comes back, that surviving is not the end, it's the beginning. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Join this family, because what happens next in this story, I promise you, will change everything. Let's continue. The machines were the first thing Marin heard when consciousness dragged her back from the void. Steady beeping, the hiss of oxygen, voices murmuring somewhere far away, urgent and muffled, like sounds filtering through deep water. Everything hurt. Her body felt like it had been disassembled and put back together by someone who didn't quite know how the pieces fit. She tried to move and pain detonated through her abdomen, sharp enough to make her gasp, sharp enough to make her eyes fly open. White ceiling tiles, fluorescent lights, too bright, too harsh. A nurse leaning over her, adjusting something on the IV pole. The smell of antiseptic and bleach and recycled air. Hospital. She was in a hospital. She's waking up. The nurse's voice was professional but gentle. Mrs. Ashford, can you hear me? Don't try to move. You're in the hospital. You're safe now. Safe. The word felt like a foreign language. And then memory crashed back. Not gradually, not gently, but all at once, like a wave breaking over her head and dragging her under. The photographs. Dominic's twisted face. Vivian's satisfied smile. Get out of my house. The door slamming. The rain. The road. The pain. The water closing over her face. The darkness swallowing her whole. My baby. The words came out as a rasp, her throat raw like she'd been screaming for days. Where's my baby? Is she alive? Where's my baby? The nurse's face softened into something careful, something that balanced truth with compassion. Your daughter is in the neonatal intensive care unit. She's very small, very early, but she's breathing on her own. She's fighting, Mrs. Ashford. She is fighting hard. Daughter. She had a daughter. A sound escaped Marin that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a laugh, something broken and beautiful and raw that came from a place deeper than language could reach. I need to see her. I need to see her right now. Not yet. The nurse pressed her gently back against the pillows. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Your body went through severe trauma, hypothermia, premature labor, emergency cesarean, significant internal bleeding. You almost died. 3 days. She'd been gone from the world for 3 days. 3 days her daughter had been fighting alone. 3 days since her husband threw her into a storm and locked the door. Who brought me here? A fisherman. He was securing his boats before the hurricane made landfall and found you collapsed on the cliff road, carried you a 1/4 mile to his truck in the middle of the storm. The doctor said if he'd been 10 minutes later, the nurse stopped herself. He saved your life. A stranger, a complete stranger had pulled her out of the water while her billionaire husband sat on a leather couch drinking tea from his favorite mug. Has my husband... Marin had to force the words past the tightness in her throat. Has Dominic been here? Has he called? Has he asked about me or the baby? The nurse's expression changed. Something uncomfortable flickered across her face, something that looked like pity, like anger held carefully in check behind professionalism. She busied herself with the monitors. Wouldn't meet Marin's eyes. Let me get your doctor. He'll explain everything. She didn't need the doctor. The silence told her everything. The way the nurse couldn't look at her told her everything. Dominic hadn't come, hadn't called, hadn't sent a message, a flower, a question. 3 days his wife had been in critical condition. 3 days his premature daughter had been fighting for her life in a plastic box connected to machines. And he hadn't so much as picked up a phone. Something inside Marin broke, but not the way things had broken before. Not her heart. That was already shattered beyond recognition. This was something deeper, something foundational, some core belief about the world, about love, about trust, about the basic decency of the man she had married, crumbled to dust and blew away like ash in the wind. And in its place, something new began to grow. Something made of iron instead of silk. Something that would never bend again. They wheeled her down to the NICU the next afternoon when her body could handle the journey. The neonatal intensive care unit was a world of soft light and quiet machines and tiny, impossible lives fighting battles no one that small should ever have to fight. And there she was. Hila, so small, barely the length of Marin's forearm. Pink skin, translucent and fragile. Tiny fingers curled into fists. Connected to more wires and tubes and monitors than seemed possible for something that weighed less than 4 pounds. But she was breathing. Her miniature chest rising and falling with stubborn, determined rhythm. Her tiny feet kicking against the air, fighting, reaching, refusing to give up. Marin pressed her hand against the glass of the incubator and felt tears sliding down her face that she didn't bother wiping away. "Your name is Isla," she whispered. "And I need you to keep fighting, baby girl, because you and I, we have a long way to go. And I promise you, I will build us a life so beautiful, so strong, so full of light that no one will ever be able to take it from us again." He appeared on the 4th morning. Not Dominic, not her husband, not the man who should have been standing at her bedside with terror in his eyes and apologies on his lips. A stranger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, sun-weathered in the way of men who spend their lives outdoors, not behind desks in glass towers but on the water, with salt in their hair and calluses on their palms. He stood in the doorway of her hospital room holding wildflowers, purple and yellow and wind-bent, the kind that grow in the cracks between coastal rocks. Nothing like the imported orchids Dominic used to have delivered by the dozen. "You don't know me," he said. His voice was quiet, careful, like he was approaching a wounded animal and didn't want to cause more harm. "My name is Tobias Grant. I'm the one who found you on the cliff road." Marin stared at this man, this rough, salt-darkened stranger with kind eyes and hands that looked like they'd pulled ropes and built things and saved lives. "You carried me to your truck, in the hurricane. Yes, you saved my life. You saved my daughter's life. I did what needed doing." He set the flowers on the table, kept his distance, respectful of her space. "I just wanted to check on you, make sure you were recovering." He came back the next day, and the next, never staying long, never prying, never asking questions she wasn't ready to answer, just present. A steady, quiet presence that asked for nothing and offered everything. And slowly, carefully, Marin told him. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. The fabricated evidence, Dominic's rage, the door slamming shut, the storm. She told him she had nowhere to go, no money. Dominic had closed their accounts and revoked her access. No car, no family, no friends, because all of her friends had been Dominic's friends first, and every one of them had disappeared the moment the door locked behind her. Tobias listened to all of it with the patience of a man who understood loss, who understood what it felt like to have the ground ripped out from under you. "I lost my son 4 years ago," he told her one evening, sitting in the chair beside her bed while rain tapped gently against the hospital window, a gentler rain, a kinder rain than the one that had nearly killed her. "Meningitis. He was 6 years old. After that, my wife couldn't look at me without seeing him, and I couldn't. I'd look at her without seeing everything I failed to protect. She left. I don't blame her." His eyes went to the window, to the gray Atlantic beyond. "I've spent 4 years punishing myself for not being able to save my boy, and then I found you on that road, and your daughter is alive because I happened to be checking my boats at the right time." He turned back to Marin. "I won't walk away from that. I can't." 3 weeks later, when the doctors finally discharged them both, Isla still fragile, still needing monitoring but strong enough to leave, Marin stood in the hospital parking lot holding her daughter in her arms and had absolutely nowhere to go. Tobias was waiting. "I have a cottage," he said, "behind the boathouse. 2 rooms, a wood stove, a harbor view, nothing fancy, but it's warm and it's dry, and there's a room I set up for the baby." "Tobias, I can't. You're not asking. I'm offering. His voice was firm but kind. Isla needs a safe place to heal. You need time to figure out what comes next. Let me give you that. The cottage was small, simple, and warm. Hardwood floors scarred by decades of use. Windows that looked out over a harbor where fishing boats rocked gently at their moorings. One bedroom had been transformed into a nursery, a second-hand crib, a rocking chair, a mobile made from seashells that clinked softly in the ocean breeze. Someone had stocked the fridge. Someone had folded towels and placed them on the bed. Someone had thought about every small thing a woman with a newborn might need and provided it without being asked. Marin stood in the middle of that tiny cottage, holding her daughter against her chest, and broke down completely. Not from sadness, from the overwhelming, devastating kindness of a stranger doing what her husband had refused to do. We're not strangers anymore, Tobias said quietly from the doorway. And you're not alone anymore. Whatever you need, I'm in the boathouse. He left her there, gave her space. But that night, standing at the cottage window after Isla had fallen asleep, Marin looked across the yard at the boathouse and saw the light on inside. She could see Tobias's silhouette, sitting at a table, holding a framed photograph in his hands. His son, the boy he couldn't save, the grief he carried like an anchor around his neck. And she understood something she hadn't had the words for until that moment. Tobias wasn't saving her. They were saving each other. Section 10, Act 6, Rising from Ashes. 6 months crawled by in the cottage, each day blending into the next with the rhythms of new motherhood, feeding, rocking, soothing, sleeping in fragments, waking to tiny cries that were somehow the most beautiful and most exhausting sound in the world. Isla grew stronger, her premature lungs catching up, her tiny body filling out. She smiled now. Gummy, radiant, full-body smiles that lit up the cottage like sunrise over the harbor. She laughed. She reached for things with chubby, determined hands. She was a fighter, had been from the moment she kicked her way into this world, 2 months early on a flooded road in a hurricane. And Marin? Marin began to create. It started during Isla's naps, a restlessness in her hands that wouldn't be quieted. She found an old set of watercolors in the cottage, left behind by a previous tenant, half-dried in their pans, and she painted. Not because she had training, not because she had talent she was aware of, but because her hands needed to make something after so much had been destroyed. Her first paintings were raw, rough, exactly what you'd expect from someone processing trauma through brushstrokes. Dark, churning storms rendered in blacks and purples and deep, bruised blues. But cutting through the darkness, always, was light. Cracks of gold splitting the clouds. Shafts of white breaking through impossible blackness. Women emerging from dark water with their faces lifted toward the sky. She painted the storm she'd survived. She painted the door that had slammed shut. She painted the cliff road where she'd collapsed and the arms that had pulled her from the flood. She painted Isla sleeping, tiny, fierce, impossibly beautiful. Tobias noticed her work one morning when he stopped by with firewood and a thermos of coffee. He stood in front of a canvas, a painting of a woman emerging from black water, her face lifted toward a crack of gold in the sky, her hands reaching for something the viewer couldn't see, and he didn't speak for a full minute. "This is extraordinary." His voice was quiet with genuine awe. "Marin, this is real art. It's just therapy." "No." He turned to face her. "This is a voice. This is something the world needs to hear." He knew a woman, Portia, who owned a gallery in the harbor town, an eccentric, passionate woman who championed emerging artists and had an eye for work that carried genuine emotional weight. Without telling Marin, Tobias brought Portia to the cottage one afternoon. Portia walked through the small room where canvases leaned against every wall, her eyes widening with each piece, her hand pressed to her chest. "These are brutal," she whispered. "And they're beautiful. I want every single one." Within 3 months, Marin had her first exhibition. She called it Aftermath. Every painting told a story of destruction and survival. Storms giving way to dawn. Broken vessels remade as shelters. Darkness fractured by impossible, stubborn, defiant light. Opening night, sold out. Every piece. Before the champagne was finished, media attention followed. A regional arts magazine ran a feature, then a national one. Collectors began reaching out, people who saw in Marin's work something that resonated with their own hidden wounds, their own private storms, their own quiet acts of survival. Marin reinvested every dollar. She rented a proper studio, a converted warehouse near the harbor with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light. She hired an assistant, built a website, took commissions that challenged her, stretched her, pushed her art into new territory. Within a year, her paintings hung in galleries across 3 cities. A documentary filmmaker reached out, wanting to tell her story, the woman who survived a hurricane and turned her pain into art that made strangers cry. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was thriving. She had built something real, something powerful, something entirely her own. Not from connections or inherited wealth or a billionaire husband's name, but from wire and paint and sleepless nights and the ferocious, unbreakable will of a mother who refused to let the world tell her she was nothing. And through all of it, through the late nights and the breakthroughs and the moments of doubt when she wanted to quit, Tobias was there, not in front of her, leading the way, not behind her, pushing, just beside her. Steady, present, a man who showed up with coffee and firewood and quiet faith and never once asked for anything in return. Their connection grew the way real things grow, not in explosions and grand declarations, but in the slow accumulation of small, honest moments. Coffee left on the doorstep at dawn, Isla falling asleep in his arms while Marin painted. Dinners shared in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. A hand offered and taken during a particularly hard day. Laugh shared over Isla's first attempt to walk. 3 steps, a wobble, a spectacular crash into a pile of cushions Tobias had strategically placed. One evening, standing on the dock behind the boathouse while the sun melted into the Atlantic and Isla napped in the cottage monitored by a baby cam, Tobias said something that stopped the world. I didn't think I'd ever feel useful again. Not after losing my boy. But watching you rebuild, watching Isla grow, it makes me think maybe broken things don't just get repaired. He looked at her. Maybe they become something entirely new. And Marin felt it. That warm, terrifying thing she'd been refusing to name. It rose in her chest like a tide, like a dawn, like the light in her own paintings, breaking through darkness she'd thought was permanent. Tobias, you don't have to say anything. He shook his head. I know you're not ready. You might never be. But I need you to know what I feel isn't pity. It is an obligation. It's something I thought I'd never feel again. She didn't answer. Not with words. But she didn't walk away either. She stood beside him on that dock, watching the sun disappear into the ocean and let herself feel, for the first time in over a year, something that wasn't pain. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks and fairy tales, family. Sometimes it arrives with firewood and silence and the steady presence of someone who simply refuses to leave. Section 11, CTA 3, Emotional Peak Engagement. Can we pause for just a moment? Look at where this woman started. Thrown into a hurricane, 8 months pregnant, left for dead on a cliff road by the man who put a ring on her finger. And look at where she is now. An artist, a mother, a woman whose work hangs in galleries and makes strangers feel seen. If Marin's journey is making you feel something right now, if it's reminding you that your darkest chapter is not your final chapter, I need you to leave a comment. Type these words, "My storm is not my story." And if someone in your life needs to hear this today, share this video. You might be the reason somebody keeps fighting. You might be the voice in their storm that says, hold on, it gets better. Now, the moment you've been waiting for is here, and I promise you, it's worth every second. 14 months after the storm, Dominic Ashford was driving through the Harbor District when his world fell apart for the second time. He was heading to a meeting, his mind on contracts, acquisitions, the business that had consumed every waking hour since the divorce he'd pushed through, without ever speaking to Marin again, without ever seeing his daughter, without ever, not once, questioning whether his mother might have lied. He stopped at a traffic light, glanced sideways at a gallery window to his left, and his heart stopped. A massive painting dominated the display. A woman emerging from black water, her face lifted toward a crack of gold in a dark sky, her hands reaching upward with fierce, unstoppable determination. The colors were violent and beautiful, storm-dark purples and blues giving way to blazing, defiant gold. The artist's name was printed on a small card at the base, Marin Calloway. Calloway, her maiden name. No trace of Ashford left. Dominic pulled into a parking space with shaking hands. He sat there staring at that painting, at that name, at the evidence of a life that had not only survived what he'd done, but had flourished because of it. He found a magazine in a nearby shop, a feature article with her photograph, older, fiercer, infinitely more powerful than the soft woman he'd married. An interview where she talked about surviving trauma, about creating art from pain, about raising her daughter alone. Her daughter. His daughter. Something cracked inside Dominic's chest. Something he'd been keeping locked for 18 months behind layers of denial and cowardice and his mother's constant reassurance that he'd done the right thing. That doubt from the night of the storm. The doubt he'd felt when he looked at Marin's face and knew, deep in his gut, that she was telling the truth. He'd buried it that night, chosen the easier path, let his mother pour concrete over it and pretend it was a foundation instead of a grave. But now, staring at Marin's success, at the empire she'd built from the wreckage he'd created, that doubt exploded out of its grave with devastating force. He drove to his mother's house, didn't call ahead, didn't knock, burst through the front door, and found Vivienne in her sitting room, thinner than he remembered, her health declining in ways doctors couldn't fully explain. Guilt, Dominic had sometimes thought, though she'd never admit it. Was it real? His voice shook. The photographs, the conception dates, the investigator. Was any of it real? Vivienne's face went pale. Dominic, what are you? I saw her. She's alive. She's successful. She built a life, a real life, from nothing. And I need to know right now whether you destroyed my family based on evidence that was real. I was protecting you. Was it real? The shout echoed through the house like thunder, like the storm that had almost killed his wife, like the sound of a man finally breaking through the wall his mother had built around him. Vivienne's composure shattered. She wasn't good enough. The words came out in fragments, broken glass falling from a broken window. No connections, no family, no money. She was beneath you, beneath this family. I hired a digital artist, the best in the country, to create those photographs. I bribed a doctor to manipulate the conception timeline to make it look like the pregnancy predated the marriage. Each word landed like a physical blow. Dominic felt his knees buckle. He grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. You fabricated everything. I thought I was saving you from a mistake. You made me believe my wife was unfaithful. You made me throw my pregnant wife into a hurricane. His voice broke completely, shattered into pieces that would never fit back together the same way. She could have died. My daughter could have died, and I pushed her out the door and locked it because I believed you. He looked at his mother, really looked at her, and for the first time in 35 years he didn't see the woman who'd raised him. He saw the woman who'd controlled him, who'd manipulated every relationship, every friendship, every decision of his entire life, who destroyed the one person who loved him without conditions, because that unconditional love threatened her control. You destroyed my family. His voice went cold, the same cold he'd used on Marin that night, and the irony wasn't lost on him. And I let you, because I was too much of a coward to stand up to you, because some part of me knew you were lying. I could see it in Marin's eyes, I could feel it, and I ignored it, because confronting you was harder than condemning my wife. He turned toward the door. Where are you going? Vivienne's voice was small, terrified, to find my daughter, to see if there is any way at all, to fix what we destroyed. He stopped, looked back one final time. And Mother, I am done with your manipulation, done with your control, done being the obedient son who lets you ruin everything he loves. I should have stood up to you the moment you first spoke against Marin. That is my sin, and I will carry it for the rest of my life. He walked out. Didn't look back again. The most dangerous lies are not the ones told to us, family. They are the ones we choose to believe, because the truth demands more courage than we're willing to give. The black sedan pulled up to the cottage on a Tuesday morning. Marin saw it through the studio window, the sleek, expensive vehicle looking grotesquely out of place against the weathered wood and fishing nets and wildflowers of the harbor yard. She knew who it was before the door opened. Knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the first drop falls. Something in the air, something in the pressure, something ancient and instinctive that whispers, "Prepare yourself." Dominic Ashford stepped out. He looked diminished. That was Marin's first thought, not the commanding, confident man who had filled every room he entered. Thinner, shadows carved beneath his eyes like bruises. His suit, still expensive, still perfectly tailored, hung on a frame that had shrunk beneath its weight. He stood in the gravel yard, staring at the cottage, at the studio, at the canvases visible through the open door, at the toys scattered on the porch, at the evidence of a life that had grown, lush and defiant and beautiful, from the wreckage he had created. Marin set down her brush, wiped her hands, picked up Isla from the play mat, She walked outside. Isla was on her hip, 14 months old now, dark-haired, bright-eyed, reaching for the seagulls circling overhead. She had Dominic's jaw, Dominic's eyes, Dominic's stubborn, determined set to her mouth. There had never been, not for 1 second, any question whose child this was. Dominic looked at his daughter for the first time, and his face crumbled, collapsed inward like a building whose foundation had finally irrevocably given way. "She looks like me." His voice was barely a whisper. "She looks exactly like me. She always did." The silence that followed was vast and terrible. It contained everything, every accusation, every betrayal, every moment of the past 18 months compressed into the space between two people standing 6 feet apart. "My mother confessed." Dominic's voice shook. "The photographs were fabricated, a digital artist she paid a fortune to create. The conception dates were manipulated by a doctor she bribed. Everything was a lie. You were telling the truth. You were always telling the truth." "I know." Marin's voice was steady, calm, not the desperate, pleading voice of the woman who had stood in that doorway 18 months ago. This was someone else, someone forged in fire, someone who had rebuilt herself from the ground up and would never be brought low again. "I always knew. I should have believed you." Tears fell freely down his face now. This billionaire, this powerful man, weeping in a fisherman's yard. "I saw it in your eyes that night. I knew you were telling the truth, and I chose her anyway, because I was afraid, because standing up to my mother was harder than destroying my wife." He took a step forward. "Please, let me make it right. Let me be her father. Let me—" "Stop." One word. Quiet. Final. Not spoken in anger, but in the absolute, unshakable authority of a woman who had survived the worst thing that could happen to her and emerged not just intact but transformed. "You can know your daughter, Dominic. When Isla's old enough to understand, she can decide for herself what role you play in her life. I won't keep her from you, because unlike you, I don't punish innocent children for the failures of their parents." She paused, let the words land. "But you and I are finished. We were finished the moment you chose your mother's lies over your wife's truth, the moment you pushed me into that storm instead of holding me through it. Marin, please. You didn't almost kill us, Dominic." She said it gently, almost tenderly, and somehow that gentleness was more devastating than any scream could have been. "You set us free. Everything I am now, everything Isla will become, exists because you closed that door. I would never have found this life inside the one you gave me. I would never have found my art, my strength, my voice. I would never have found—" She stopped, but her eyes drifted, just for a moment, toward the boathouse, and at that exact moment, the boathouse door opened. Tobias stepped out. He took in the scene, the black sedan, the stranger in the expensive suit, Marin standing on the porch with Isla on her hip, and he understood. Without a word being spoken, without a single explanation, he walked across the yard, not quickly, not aggressively, slowly, steadily, with the unhurried certainty of a man who knew exactly where he belonged. He stopped beside Marin, didn't touch her, didn't speak, just stood there, solid, present, unmovable, a quiet wall of steadiness between her past and her future. Dominic looked at Tobias, looked at this weathered fisherman with salt in his hair and calluses on his hands, this man who had pulled his wife from the water, who had given her shelter, who had believed in her when her own husband had thrown her away. This man who had done, without money, without power, without resources, what a billionaire could not. And Dominic understood. He looked at Marin one last time, at the woman she had become, fierce, luminous, untouchable, at the daughter on her hip who had his eyes and her mother's unbreakable spirit, at the life they'd built without him, beautiful and whole and complete. He got back in the sedan. He drove away. Marin stood on the porch, watching the car disappear down the harbor road. Tobias stood beside her, silent, patient. "You okay?" he asked. She turned to look at him, at this man who had appeared in the worst moment of her life and simply never left, who had saved her not once but every day, with coffee and firewood and quiet presence and the steady, unwavering belief that she was worth saving. She took his hand, his fingers, rough, warm, certain, closed around hers. "Yeah," she said, and for the first time since the storm, for the first time in longer than she could remember, the word was completely, utterly, profoundly true. "I really am." Tobias smiled, that small, rare smile that she had come to treasure more than any diamond Dominic had ever given her. "Good," he said. Because Isla just pulled all the shells off the mobile, and I think she ate one." Marin laughed. The sound surprised her. Bright, unguarded, real. She hadn't laughed like that since before the storm. Maybe not ever. They walked inside together. Isla clapped her hands and shrieked with delight. The harbor glittered through the windows. The sky was impossibly perfectly clear. And somewhere in the distance, a storm was gathering over someone else's world. But not hers. Never hers again. Now, family, before we close, I need to speak to your heart directly, because this story isn't just entertainment. It carries truths that every single one of us needs to hear. The first lesson is about blind loyalty. Dominic Ashford wasn't evil. Let me say that again. He was not an evil man. He was a weak man. A man who allowed someone else's voice to drown out his own conscience. He looked into his wife's eyes, saw the truth, and chose the lie, because the lie was easier. Because the truth would have required him to stand up, speak up, and risk being uncomfortable. Don't let anyone, not a parent, not a partner, not a friend, become the voice in your head that overrides your own moral compass. The people who truly love you will never ask you to destroy someone else to prove your loyalty. That's not love. That's control. The second lesson is about survival. Marin didn't have money. She didn't have connections. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have shoes on her feet. All she had was a baby who needed her to keep breathing. And she kept breathing. Sometimes survival isn't about strength. It isn't about having answers or resources or a roadmap. Sometimes survival is just the decision, moment by moment, breath by breath, to not give up, to keep standing, to keep walking, even when you don't know where you're going. If you are in your storm right now, if you are standing in the rain wondering if anyone cares, hear me, keep walking. The road doesn't end here. The third lesson is about the right people. Tobias didn't rescue Marin because he was looking for love. He rescued her because he was a good man in the right place at the right time who chose to act. And from that single act of compassion, an entire life was built. The right people don't always arrive the way you expect. They don't always look the way you imagined. Sometimes they show up with wildflowers instead of roses. Sometimes they offer a cottage instead of a castle. Sometimes the love that saves your life doesn't come in a luxury sedan. It comes in a fishing truck in the middle of a hurricane. Be open to it. And the fourth lesson, maybe the most important one, is about forgiveness. Marin didn't destroy Dominic. She didn't take revenge. She didn't scream or threaten or demand he suffer. She simply outgrew him. She became someone he could never reach, not because she built walls, but because she built wings. And that, family, is the most powerful thing a person can do. Not punish the one who hurt you, not waste your precious life plotting their downfall, but become so strong, so whole, so full of light that their shadow can never touch you again. That is true power. That is true victory. That is the kind of revenge that doesn't require hatred, only growth. Family, if this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something real and true and deep, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Hit that like button if you believe every woman deserves to be believed. If you believe that the truth always rises, even when powerful people try to bury it. Share this video with someone who is in their storm right now. Someone who is standing in the rain, wondering if the sun will ever come back. Send them this story, because sometimes the right words at the right time can save a life. Drop a comment. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the door slamming? Was it Tobias appearing with wildflowers? Was it Marin's quiet refusal to take Dominic back? I want to know. Talk to me. This family listens. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join us. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. We tell stories here that heal, that challenge, that shake you to your core, and then remind you who you really are. This is Love Chronicles with Mr. Incredible. Until next time, remember this. Your storm is not your story. Your story is what you build after the rain stops. God bless you. I love you. And I will see you in the next one.